You're listening to the Sisterhood of Limitless Living podcast. I'm your host, Dr. April Moreno. I'm a public health specialist focused on integrative wellness and autoimmune living, supporting the community of women, where I help you to live your best quality of life through being your best self-advocate. Let's get started. Welcome to this episode of the Sisterhood of Limitless Living. I am just so happy that it's been over a year already of this podcast, and generally I try to make it a weekly podcast. I'm doing my best to make sure that it releases on Monday mornings, but these days, after a year of podcasting weekly, I also started a second podcast during the pandemic called COVID-19, Public Health Policy and Culture, and trying to get both of these podcasts out on a weekly basis has been a challenge. Just from the editing, from the scheduling, the interviewing, the editing, I could just really briefly in 5 seconds tell you the whole process of what it takes to do a podcast. It's like finding people to talk to or the topic, scheduling an interview, interviewing them, editing the podcast, and then promoting the podcast, marketing it, creating images, the whole thing. And then doing that on a weekly basis. With 2 podcasts now on a weekly basis. Actually, this is what I'll be talking about in this episode. Consider donating on Patreon to the Sisterhood of Limitless Living podcast. We would greatly appreciate it. We greatly need the help to get started with being able to outsource, being able to hire editors and marketing and people who can help to promote the podcast in new directions so that we can continue to grow and share the word of multicultural, limitless living with autoimmune conditions for women. I love my podcast. I love the work that we do here. I love being able to highlight and include diverse voices in autoimmune living. I love being able to share the stories of inspiration and support of women who are able to share what they went through in those most difficult of times through their diagnosis, misdiagnosis, non-diagnosis, and then into taking control over their health and their lives in various ways, whether that be starting a business or getting control of the nutrition and exercise or developing mindfulness tools and strategies for their health and wellness. There are just so many ways that the Sisterhood of Limitless Living has addressed so many of these ways for people to build their health and design their lives ideally despite the challenges of autoimmune living. Consider a donation on Patreon to the Sisterhood of Limitless Living. We have some other benefits that are involved in that donation process, as you will see more on the Patreon link. More information is at sisterhoodoflimitlessliving.com. Today, we'll talk about this topic of self-care and the proactive decision-making process to building your health and wellness. This is connected to my recent blog post that I just did a couple of days ago in the Sisterhood of Limitless Living. This is a new website that I put together after getting the domain. So we have sisterhoodoflimitlessliving.com for the podcast and the community. I wanted to mention as well that on July 1st, Lydia, Romero Johnson, and I are working together to host a workshop on self-care with autoimmune conditions. This is a free workshop that's going to be from 1 to 2:30 Pacific time on July 1st, where we will help you to design your own self-care practice. We will go through what it's like to live with autoimmune and chronic health conditions, being part of the women of color community, and how we can build a community of self-care and rest through this workshop. In this workshop, you will learn stress reduction techniques and self-reflection techniques. We will guide you through that exercise at the beginning and end of the workshop. You will learn more about understanding nutrition for yourself for autoimmune health and wellness specific to your needs. You'll learn how to develop your own mindfulness activity for relaxation and creativity. And then finally, you will also learn how to build your own holistic and integrative wellness practice. So this is a lot of information and a lot of guidance that we'll be going through for the development of autoimmune self-care. So RSVP at sisterhoodoflimitlessliving.com. Hope to see you there. In this episode, we are talking about the topic of self-care and how it relates to decision making. I wanted to share a little bit more on this topic that I put up on my blog on self-care, time, and energy management. More proactive about this process. This conversation started as I thought about the two podcasts I've recently been doing, and how even though it's like sometimes you want to do things that are really helpful to people, and these are things that you enjoy doing, there's this circle that's out there. It's a Venn diagram that's like this great point in the middle of all of this, where it's like the things you're good at, the things you like to do, and then the things that the world needs. And then at that midpoint of all of these circles in this Venn diagram, that's supposed to be the place of purpose and the place where your success in your life would actually take place in terms of the most impact to reaching out to the world. It's supposed to be at the middle of this Venn diagram of what you're good at, what you enjoy doing, and what the world needs. So that's always a fun way to look at things as well. But for me, I was really going through this kind of dilemma in my mind about the two podcasts I've been doing, COVID-19, Public Health Policy and Culture, and then also the Sisterhood of Limitless Living. It's been such a wonderful experience to be able to do both of these. The thing is, I wanted to do these both on a weekly basis, but then realizing, gosh, I am not able to do this all on my own. All of it. It's a team of one. I mean, Wellington, my schnauzer, has been my co-host on all of these episodes, but that just pretty much means that he's listening in. But now we have two co-hosts. I don't know if I even mentioned this to you all, but I have a puppy. We got a new puppy. Her name is Bernadette. She's also a giant schnauzer. She's super cute, and she's going to grow really fast. So we enjoy all the moments that we have with her as a little puppy. She's sweet, and she's just so much fun. I can see the similarities and differences between her and her brother, who's also a giant schnauzer. She will also get trained in service training as well to help with autoimmune conditions, balance, walking, and getting up off the ground, things like that. So these two things that I've been doing on a weekly basis, in addition to my work as a consultant in public health, has been quite challenging. And this is so typical, isn't it, of people with autoimmune conditions. Often we're so type A. Nobody's telling me to do this stuff on a weekly basis. No one's telling me I have to do a weekly podcast for two podcasts, but this is stuff that I feel drawn to do. So it just got exhausting. It's just like, okay, I don't spend a lot of time with my family. I'm always spending hours editing on a weekly basis. Now it's for 2 episodes a week, and sometimes I don't get through it. This topic came up, this emergence of this topic of proactive decision making for self-care. This is what I'm talking about today because of how, as women, as people with autoimmune conditions, and as many of us are type A personalities, where we want to be the best of who we can be. We want to achieve, we want to get so much done in many cases. The high achieving autoimmune woman, I know I'm not the only one. How do you maintain your productivity, your enjoyment in life, and also your health and your self-care? So this is a great time to discuss all of this as we are in the pandemic. You've seen these conversations with some people who are like, if you are at home during the pandemic and you've done nothing, you are to blame. There's this spectrum of expectations that the world is placing on us, and then those that we're placing on ourselves. On the one hand, it's like, okay, we know that we're in a pandemic. We are working from home, but this is stuff that a lot of us already do. But working from home during a pandemic is not the same as working from home in normal times. And then working from home with the added feelings and in many cases trauma that emerge from hearing about police brutality, injustice, and things that are happening to people of color. Something that affects the Black community. It is something that also affects brown bodies. I don't go out in public in my neighborhood because of the pandemic and the blame people are placing on Asian Americans. With all the added trauma of everything that's going on, working from home is difficult. So there's that one side where you don't have to do anything right now. Just rest and get through this process, which is fair. This is totally fair. This is a time where we should not necessarily be expected to be productive. People are trying to stay alive and healthy and have mental well-being. And then what we're hearing from the world, some people out there from the motivational speakers and coaches community, entrepreneurial community, are saying things like, if you have not taken full opportunity during this shutdown and time at home to write 10 books or develop 10 coaching programs or design your new business products, then you've wasted the time. So there's that side as well. Making people feel bad if they don't do all kinds of stuff during this pandemic. You don't have to do that either. We do what we need to do with what we can do and what we want to do. In the middle is us individually, as people, as women living with autoimmune or chronic conditions, and what we want to do, and managing that proactively with what we can do, and also seriously considering through all of this what we actually enjoy doing. Thinking about these 3 factors, for me, I designed almost like a matrix in my head of options, and then 3 columns of 3 factors of joy, purpose, and self-care. So joy is something that I think is crucial. It's like the gas, the energy that powers us through life. If you don't have joy and that motivation to live each day, then it makes it so much harder to actually want to, the will to live. It's in there with joy, joyfulness of life, activities, and perspective. So then the second factor is on purpose. So how are we looking at our purpose? What kinds of activities are we doing that connect to our purpose? What kinds of things are we doing on a daily basis that don't speak to our purpose? What are things that we don't enjoy doing that we feel trapped or stuck with doing on a daily basis that maybe we don't necessarily have to do in this exact way? And then the third factor that I chose was self-care. So this is also an important one. I think all 3 of these are crucial. Self-care and how I maintain my wellness as a person living with autoimmune conditions. I came up with these 3 factors, and you can design your own 3 factors as well. If you're going through a decision-making process and you don't know exactly what to do, but you know that something has to change, this is one option, a proactive approach to make decisions based on things that are important to you. So I wanted to propose this process and this method that I'm sharing with you that I've done over the past couple of days as I think about these options in terms of, for me, it's podcasting. These 2 podcasts that I'm running on a weekly basis, and how I can manage my energy, my time, and my joy, and make sure that it's still connected to purpose as well. So when I talked about that Venn diagram, I think that they are connected so much to purpose in a lot of ways, but then the joy is in there as well. The self-care itself is not in that Venn diagram, what you're good at, what you like to do, and what people want in the world. I don't think self-care is in that equation. So that's why I created this other matrix for myself based on factors that I think are important to me. And so when it came to podcasting and these 2 podcasts on a weekly basis, I had 3 options. Either I can make sure and force myself, type A all the way into releasing 2 podcast episodes a week, like 8 per month, basically, sometimes more, sometimes less. But on a weekly basis, 2 a week was my original goal. But I can face the consequences on how this would affect my time with my family, my energy levels, and overall it starts to become a minus all around if I think about my joy, my purpose, and my self-care, because I would be exhausted. I would not have enough time for people who I care about in my family, and then I would be risking my autoimmune wellness, stress, and exhaustion, crucial factors in how these diseases affect us. Option 2 for me was whether I could reduce these numbers of podcast episodes and do them like every other week instead of weekly, which is a realistic option. I think a lot of people release their podcasts on a every other weekly basis, semi-monthly basis. However, I felt that I would be missing out with connecting with people, and I would be missing out time-wise with the pandemic. So my second podcast again is on COVID-19. This is a historic moment in time, and it's really crucial because information, policy, all of this stuff changes on a weekly basis. Even what we hear in terms of guidelines from the CDC or the World Health Organization or the NIH or anyone else has changed so often, and having those episodes released as frequently, as quickly as possible has made a difference in terms of timeliness. So that's a risk that I would be taking in terms of purpose, I feel, if I did this option of doing fewer episodes per month. But then self-care would be good. I would have more time to relax and rest and practice self-care, relaxation, exercise, yoga, all of it. And I wouldn't have the same stress levels of expectation upon myself to do all the things on a weekly basis, twice a week. Option 3 was to think about how to outsource and begin to hire out to do the things that I enjoy, and then to hire out, delegate out the things that I don't particularly enjoy. So I'll tell you, I love podcasting. When I talk about podcasting, my voice changes, my eyes light up. Apparently, I am in the flow. I'm in the zone when I think about my podcasts. But what I don't like is the number of hours I spend editing. All of those things, I'll do it and the time passes by. The hours fly by. I really feel like it's something that enhances my time with my family, my loved ones, my pups, and my husband. That's the third option. However, to outsource, that requires the financial capacity to do so. And so I built the Patreon page. I started working with some websites like Podcorn to connect to podcast advertisers, and then also signed up for us to join a podcast network. So we'll see what happens. I'm waiting to see if we get accepted into this podcast network. And that would be very nice in terms of marketing it, connecting with other podcasters, and building awareness. So that would be the best option. And I'd still get my self-care because I wouldn't be working so many hours on editing, marketing, getting the word out about the podcast. So much of that process can be hired out to virtual assistants, the connections and reaching out, communicate with people that you want to speak to. You have the concept. That's really the heart of the podcast. Finally, I wanted to just say that I think it's going to be a hybrid. For me, it's working on the timeliness as much as possible. Option 4, really listening to myself first. Self-care is going to be the priority. Joy is a priority too, but self-care and health has to be number 1 in life. So that's where I'm heading right now. Self-care as a priority, and option 4, getting these episodes released as often as I can with respect to my wellness. That is this week's topic of conversation in the Sisterhood of Limitless Living. It's about strategic and proactive planning and self-care, and how we can manage our time and our energy, and to consider some key factors as you bring up possible options in response, and making decisions based on how much of those key factors are being met. So I hope that strategy is helpful for you. On July 1st, Lydia, Romero Johnson, and I are building a self-care workshop for you to build your own wellness practice, to assess your self-care and wellness, to develop a mindfulness awareness practice, to learn about how nutrition can optimize your autoimmune health and wellness, and then to build your own integrative and holistic health approach to autoimmune living. So join us on July 1st at 1 o'clock Pacific, and the registration is at sisterhoodoflimitlessliving.com. I hope to see you there. And once again, I hope this episode has been helpful and beneficial for your wellness. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sisterhood of Limitless Living. Follow us on iTunes or Spotify or even Podbean, where we're hosted. For more information about Dr. April Moreno, you can visit aprilmorenophd.com. Take care and have a good day.